structures to establish, which essentially you're doing is saying, I'm going to have a business that is going to reinsure my business. So you can have a captive insurance company or a reinsurance company. The money that you put into this captive is a tax deduction against your entity. So if I have an S corporation and I have a captive insurance company that I set up myself, the money that I'm rolling over into the captive insurance company is a tax deduction for me. The money that's sitting inside of the captive can grow, but it's also being utilized in the event that I ever have an issue with my company from an insurance perspective. So now I can use my own insurance company to cover liabilities associated with my operational entity. That's the captive or the reinsurance.
And when is that legitimate? Because it seems like as a YouTube business, I need to be insured for things that you would never even think about.
Of course.
Like, let's just say we talk negatively about a company here and they sue for defamation.
Mm-hmm.
Things like this seem like reasonable things to insure for, and going through a traditional insurance policy might have severe limitations on that.
Of course. The issue is people abuse the reinsurance company, because when you put money into that reinsurance company, you're like, okay, I parked that money there and it's just sitting there now. I want to go use that money. I don't want to just let it sit there. So what they do is taxpayers will start taking loans against that captive insurance money, and then they take loans to go spend it on things that they shouldn't have spent it on, and they abuse the intention of the structure. And when that happens, the entire structure can come crumbling apart. We've seen taxpayers get into audits with these captive insurance plans, and similar to the charitable LLC, and because of the way in which they utilize these structures, the whole thing comes tumbling down. The IRS audits not only their operational entity, they audit the captive entity, and they start assessing clients going back year over year to start figuring out, okay, well, if you're doing...
What do all 6 branches of the U.S. military and 90% of the top pro and college sports teams have in common?
Settle down, brother. This is the Quarter Report, powered by ENC.com. South Africa's a movie. Welcome to the watch party. Recording within just a few minutes, less than 10 minutes after President Ramaphosa ended his unusually short, I have to say, it was only like 13 minutes, he looked tired, his unusually short address to the nation on the most severe of matters, which is the allegations from that press conference last Sunday that General Mkhwanazi put forward against a variety of different people and powerful people in the police force right now. Long-time viewers and listeners to the podcast will know that I literally never take notes. I think I've taken notes twice ever on this show, but I took notes tonight because this is a special episode on, frankly, one of the biggest stories in modern South African history, and I put it up there with election results, the last ones, and the July 2021 riots, because they are so important. Here's what we're going to talk about. One, a commission of inquiry has been announced, no surprises there, but we were hoping for rapid, speedy, incisive answers. That's what the country needs. We need answers right now on these bombshell allegations that go to the heart of whether or not we can even rely on our security forces, or whether we're living in a mafia state where syndicates control the judiciary and the police force and the correctional services and everything. And instead, we got a commission of inquiry that is expected to provide an interim report after 3 months and another interim report after 6 months. That is 2 trimesters on the way to having a human baby. From the one night where I hope that you actually wanted to have a baby and intended to have one, through the first trimester of 3 months, into the second trimester, you're basically in the final stretch, folks, of having a baby if you have one tonight. If you get pregnant right now. I don't know what about that address would have turned you on so much, or the impending realization of a terrifying mafia state would have really got you hot under the socks. Maybe you're a Godfather fan, but like, if you had a baby starting tonight, you would be in the 3rd trimester by the time we just got a second interim report. It is too long. It is too long. I don't mind a commission of inquiry. I think it's the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. I don't mind a retiring acting Deputy Chief Justice. I don't mind all of this. You have to have a judicial commission of inquiry. You have to carefully, painstakingly go through the evidence. You have to check all of the facts. You've got to interrogate people who are under investigation. But 3 and 6 months just for interim reports, not even for a final conclusion, is so unacceptable. This was supposed to be a throw forward to what we were going to be talking about across the show. Poor editor James is rolling his eyes. But we're going to talk more about that. We're going to talk about the fact that the police minister has been placed on special leave, and it seems like it's going to be with pay because he didn't say anything different. We're going to talk about the fact that the president has not announced anything regarding General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi largely is being left untouched, which is good because there have been threats to violence and all kinds of craziness happening in KZN if he is suspended, fired, or killed, which it seems like he is not. And so yes, Mthunu is on leave of absence. Earlier reporting today suggested that Mthunu asked to be placed on special leave. Ramaphosa was very clear saying, I have decided. So we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about the wide-ranging powers that this Commission of Inquiry has been given, because it's actually quite interesting. They've been given a pretty broad remit to investigate where the evidence and the allegations take them into the cops, the metro cops, the judiciary, all these different powerful organizations, politics and the rest. And they have been empowered to recommend what kind of measures should be taken against different people, like suspensions, like, criminal trials and the rest. So that's what we're going to get into. By the end of this show, you will know everything about what just happened and how I feel about it, which is why this show is going to be longer than the president's actual address was. What else? Oh, and by the way, we were going to have a cute announcement this week, which has now been completely washed away. We were going to announce that we've launched a merch store, which we have. We were going to have a big cute announcement for it. Never mind that now. South African news has overwhelmed that. But many people have been asking for merch like this, or if you want a tote or a mug or a t-shirt of various designs, go on to www.3beaniesnetwork.com. And of course, you can watch this full episode exclusively, as well as all of our episodes are in full to watch on enca.com. Let's get into it.
I'm so pissed off at all of you. Why has no one told me about weed torching? And all it takes is a 1.8 million BTU propane torch. I've been avoiding weeding this rock garden because no one wants to get on their hands and knees and weed.
enca.com. Let's get into it. And I firstly want to congratulate the president on not using the words shocked, surprised, or dismayed. I think he's been reading our tweets, and I think he figured out how hurtful we are of him acting shocked, surprised, and dismayed. There was a great tweet a while ago essentially saying for each retweet I will make Ramaphosa's eyes bigger to make him look more shocked and more dismayed. I think he realized, finally reading the room, that we South Africans don't like to hear that he wasn't on top of his game and he wasn't in a position to know what was going on ahead of time. In fact, of course, he was in Brazil for BRICS. Some people have suggested that General Mkhwanazi strategically made the decision to have this press conference when Ramaphosa was in Brazil, to drag this out as long as possible, waiting for Ramaphosa to get back and investigate and talk to all these different people and decide what he was going to do. That's an interesting theory. It could definitely be true. There was another reporting actually this morning, and I cannot believe I've taken notes, but there was other reporting this morning from the Sunday Times suggesting that National Police Commissioner Fani Masemola and General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi are being investigated for potential corrupt tenders to the value of 6.7 million rand. And so it's left us in this interesting situation where maybe this is a revenge investigation into Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, maybe because we know that Fani Masemola has been investigated for a long time for potentially corrupt tenders and the rest. Maybe Mkhwanazi knew that he was being investigated for that, and maybe he said what he said last Sunday as a way of shifting the power dynamic around him when people are investigating, which is not to say that that is what's happened. But it's interesting to consider that there is this investigation happening. We don't know how long it's been happening, and we don't even know, we haven't yet got official announcement from the investigators in the state what Times Live has reported is true. Because an interesting complexity of this is maybe, just maybe, Mkhwanazi is being investigated, and maybe, just maybe, he went to the press last Sunday to protect himself, but he also maybe didn't lie. Maybe he said true things and he is independently being investigated. And that's what's so complicated about this, is that I think in many ways, if what he claimed turns out to be true, he needs to be acknowledged as a generational hero for all South Africans, and for many people he is a hero. But when you've been in the police force for that long, and high up in the security services for that long, you may have got involved in some stuff. And they may, as my brother said, and he's genuinely my brother for those who discover this afresh every time we watch this show or listen to this show, there may be a mutually assured destruction thing happening here amongst all the people at the top end of the security forces. Okay, so the president did specifically use the word allegedly many times, many times, and I appreciate that because he really didn't want to say anything that could be quoted as being actually what he believes. By the way, we're here at NCA.com because we had a power outage 12 minutes before he was supposed to start. We had to rush across from my brother's place. The people who watch the show a lot will remember that we had to do this last week. It really felt like they were trying to shut us down and silence us, as I joked about last week, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, so the president announced urgent and comprehensive investigation is required. He announced that Sile Matlanga is about to retire, in the act of retiring. Is acting Deputy Chief Justice, is going to head this Judicial Commission of Inquiry with some other judges, and that is good. Now, a lot of people have been saying, but the Zondo Commission took 4 years and we didn't get anything out of it. That's not true. We got a lot of findings, a lot of recommendations. It's just the NPA hasn't acted on it, and the NPA has made some accusations against the Justice Department for stopping them from accessing evidence to investigate that stuff. And also, since the Zondo Commission, a lot of people implicated in the Zondo Commission have got political appointments. The ANC and Ramaphosa specifically has appointed them. So the comparisons and fears about a commission of inquiry running nowhere and getting nothing done are valid in this case. But in one very crucial way, the commission of inquiry that Ramaphosa described in this address just now is different from the Zondo Commission. The Zondo Commission was an open-ended, come one, come all, let's try and get as many people to talk about what was allegedly happening under the Zuma years with the Guptas as possible. It was open-ended because they were trying to persuade people who've been implicated to come forward and testify. They were trying to persuade witnesses to come forward and testify. Some days, like that infamous day where Zuma arrived to testify and then didn't. He left just before he was supposed to get on the stand. Some people were obstructing the requests of the Zondo Commission. And the point was, it was open-ended and lasted a long time, to spend enough time getting people to come forward and testify. Now, this Judicial Commission of Inquiry could be different because they have specific targets to depart from, specific allegations to start with, and specific evidence that General Mkhwanazi has provided to start their stirring, which means automatically they will be able to call people to testify and defend themselves who Mkhwanazi is implicated. And when there are counterclaims against Mkhwanazi, like Shadrach Sabir's extraordinary claims about Mkhwanazi sitting on and doing nothing about the AKA murder inquiry, they can call Shadrach and they can call General Mkhwanazi immediately and they can get on with it. And I also don't think this is going to kind of be a sprawling investigation that will go everywhere. But they have been given a very wide remit, and it's super interesting. Ramaphosa talked about investigating illegal acts, suppression of investigations, the political killings task team stuff. That is the core of Mkhwanazi's complaint against the police minister, now on special leave. The inducement into illegal acts, the victimization and targeted removal of whistleblowers, and officials who just didn't want to play along with corrupt and bad dealings. But the super interesting part for me is that this investigations commission has also been given the powers to go into people who may no longer be in the police service, but were at high levels of the police service, who failed to act on credible evidence and warnings. Who failed to act on credible evidence and warnings. Now, if you've been following this show and our coverage in the last week, and many of you have, thank you very much, you all know that Kat Matlala has been implicated, the infamous businessman who was not named, but named by name, but referred to by Ramaphosa as that he's the attempted murder guy from the address that you may have just watched. We certainly did, I'm not telling you about it now. Kat Matlala, we know, but it has spoken about it on the record, gave up his penthouse suite in a prestigious hotel in Pretoria, in Tshwane, to Becky Taylor to use at his leisure when he was police minister. And Becky Taylor said, there's nothing here, there's nothing going into this, whatever. I barely know the guy, I was just using this place out to travel a lot. But as police minister, you used the penthouse luxury accommodation of a compromised business person who was getting massive tenders. Tembisa, later, that's the Tembisa procurement for 2.3 billion, and later a 360 million rand tender to provide health services to the police that was then cancelled, but only after Kat Matlala got 50 million. Why is the police minister taking these gifts, these charitable living circumstances, these places to stay? It is totally inappropriate and unacceptable. So there, and I mean, you could go further back than that. Natim Tetra was police minister also. You could go back to previous national police commissioners. You can go back to all these people. The commission of inquiry has been enabled to go and investigate failure to act on credible evidence or internal warning signs within SAPS that there was bad stuff afoot, there was cuck afoot. Again, for those of you who listen or watch the show for a very long time, you know what cuck afoot means. And then he also said, the president, that the investigation would go to SAPS, the judiciary, even the Metro Police, and specifically Joburg, Ekurhuleni, and Tshwane. The days of Coca-Colas and KFCs might be over. Days of hot lunches might be over. It's interesting that he cited those three places specifically, considering the fact that General Mkhwanazi spoke about how the political killings task team, he claims that task team was being attacked and tried to be shut down by the police minister and Deputy National Commissioner of Crime Detection, Shadrack Sibiya, because they helped the Gauteng Investigative Services of the Gauteng SAPS to uncover a criminal syndicate, a drug cartel. Now, that probably would have happened in Joburg, Ekurhuleni, and Tshwane, right? That's one if you're talking about Gauteng. So, that all sounds kind of good, right? Obviously, the commission must recommend disciplinary measures, which is also cool. The commission can say, we think this person should be suspended, this person should face trial, this person, this person, this person. That's all good. But the commission has to supply an interim report after 3 months, and another one after 6 months. And when the final report's submitted, open-ended, it's too long. We need decisive action now. We need the core claims investigated now. We need Police Minister Mkhunu to defend himself and to clear up this fundamental core mess now. Right now. We can't have 3 months. I know that he's named Feroz Kachalia to be acting Police Minister. I know that he's given like 2 weeks for all of this to kick off, including with Mapanga starting in August, all this stuff. It's too long. I'm so glad that Toko Didiza, National Assembly Speaker, called on those 3 committees to start investigating, those standing committees to start investigating the claims now. Because it has to be happening now. We need movement right now. We can't be waiting. Also, as you know, the longer that anything sits around, the more likely it is that witnesses become compromised and intimidated. Case files, dockets go missing. They happen in SAPS all the time. Evidence gets tampered with and disappears. The longer it runs, the more of a mess it can become. And the longer it runs, the more the South African public loses faith that justice is being served rather than there being a massive cover-up. And that's important here. Ramaphosa spoke about this. The faith in our police service needs to be restored. And even before Mkhwanazi's allegations, none of us had faith in our police service to keep us safe. Most of us don't walk outside most times of the day, no matter where we're living in the country, because it's just not safe. Particularly if you're a woman, but even if you're a man. Particularly if you're a child, but even if you're an adult. We don't do it. It's unsafe. It's too dangerous. We know that case files go missing and bribes happen here and funny things happen in police stations. And by funny, I mean illegal and frankly reprehensible and evil. But we also know that the police force has been gutted, and we know that it's suffered terrible leadership and management at the top end. We know there have been these reports like the Marikana Commission report and the Khayelitsha Commission report saying how we need to reform the police service, and none of those have been taken advantage of. So I do feel bad for the good-hearted cops who are trying to do their best and are trying to patrol communities where they are overwhelmed, where they are being overwhelmed by criminals, where they're not being supported properly. I'm thinking about, for example, the Cape Flats in the Western Cape, where they are being undermined by senior leadership, where the work they're trying to do is being blocked by senior management structures who have perverse incentives. I feel for them. But what this needs to become now, particularly if they're going to waste all this time, sorry for the bleep, is a comprehensive reformation of the police service to bring it in line with what it needs to do in this country and battle crime. Okay.
You like that, Enzo? I see you, barking boy. I got you 3 in a row. Now where's Daddy? Yes, sir. Enzo, I see you.
At upfitsupply.com, we know the tradesmen are the backbone of our communities.
Remember Windsurf, the $3 billion VS Code fork that was about to be purchased by OpenAI 2 months ago? I do, and I've been waiting for the update on that for a while. And today we got that update. The deals finally went through. And now they are working on... Huh? Big welcome to Varun and others from the Windsurf team joining DeepMind. DeepMind's the Google thing. What happened? This one is utter chaos. I've been going out of my way to collect every source, talk to everyone I can just to figure out what happened here. Why did the OpenAI deal fail? When did Google come in? What has Google done? And where is this all going? As mentioned in this tweet, This isn't an acquisition. This is a bunch of the people from Windsurf, including the CEO, leaving for Google. Windsurf still exists. It is not part of Google. So what happened here? Because this means a lot of people potentially are getting screwed. This says a ton about the market, the way that Google is thinking about competing with other companies. OpenAI didn't do the acquisition, so what happened there? We have a lot to dive into here, like even more than usual. I'm currently filming at 8:30 p.m. on a Friday because I just want to make sure that this stuff is covered responsibly, and I think there's a ton of misinformation going around. All of that said, I only stand to lose money from this, so a quick word from today's sponsor, and then we'll dive into all faster. My favorite is that they're using gaming processors like CPUs. They're doing it for a reason. Traditional server CPUs are really slow on the single thread. They're focused on having as many cores to cut their build and their CI times 2 times faster deployment. Directly related things. Trust me, this will make it all make more sense. First, I'm going to talk about a different company. Just, again, hear me out. We're going to talk about Scale AI. If you're not already familiar, Scale is an absurdly successful startup focused on doing data stuff for AI. Primarily, it was originally selling data that you could use to train AI. They do a hell of a lot more now. They've been absurdly successful, and one of the earlier AI companies as well. So why am I bringing these guys up right now? Well, they had a very interesting non-acquisition a couple weeks ago. This was one of the strangest deals that I've seen, and I think it will help you guys understand a bit more of what's going on. So Meta invested $14 billion into Scale AI. Why would they do that? The reason's actually quite interesting, and it's not necessarily because of Scale as a business. It's actually about Scale as a team that Meta and Mark Zuckerberg seemingly personally had interest in. This deal gave Meta a 49% stake in the data labeling startup, while bringing the Scale AI founder, Alexander Wang, into Meta's leadership to head a new superintelligence research lab. This is the real interesting detail. The trade that happened here is Meta bought just under 50% of the company, so they're not the majority shareholder. They just have a lot of say and vote. And part of the trade was that they would bring the CEO and founder of Scale AI over. What the hell? This is a crazy deal, but it represents a huge thing going on in this world right now. It's poaching season. What do I mean by that? Well, you've probably all seen the crazy deals floating around of Meta paying top researchers from companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and more hundreds of millions of dollars as individuals to come join Meta and try to get them caught up in the AI research like chaos. Meta fell behind really fast. They made bets that weren't good, and now they're struggling to keep up with the lead research labs. As such, they need to spend a lot of money in order to try and catch up, and they're willing to do things that are absurd. And let's be real, it doesn't matter how well compensated you are at a company like OpenAI. If somebody offers you $100 million to quit, you're gonna do it. And that's how a lot of these companies are starting to think. There were some other similarly crazy deals happening recently, not necessarily in the hundreds of millions per person, but probably not too far off. One of them that comes to mind is actually around Claude, Code, and Cursor. The relationship between Anthropic and Cursor is chaotic now to the point where I feel like I need to do my own separate video about just that. We'll get there in a bit. But one of the parts of that drama is that the creators of Claude Code, like the original 2 that led the team and made it happen, they both got poached and now work at Cursor. Everyone's poaching everyone from everywhere, and they're spending a ton of money in order to do it, giving away absurd levels of equity, usually on cliffs, all the usual stuff there. The reason for all that is finding really advanced talent for creating AI and AI experiences is not easy. These aren't traditional engineering roles, like understanding the way these pieces come together and also the research side behind it. Some of these researchers have been studying AI for 20 plus years. You can't just learn that in a weekend the way you can a new framework. If your company's moving to React, you can hire a bunch of Angular engineers and teach them React pretty quick. If your company's trying to build an AI model, you need people who have been in the trenches for a while. Your company's trying to build a complex AI tool that uses a bunch of agents. It's going to take you at least a few months to a few years to figure out how those parts come together and do it right. If your company needs a ton of data for the training of these AIs, you can't just take a random data engineer and hope they know what they're doing. You need someone who's led teams that do that as well. These are all the pieces that are complex enough that it's just not worth hoping you're going to find success in it. And these really big successful companies like OpenAI, Meta, and now to an extent even Cursor are willing to spend disgusting amounts of money in order to maximize the likelihood that they have a good outcome at the end of this crazy AI race. I really want to focus in on this Scale AI acquisition, though. There have been a couple deals like this recently. There was also Character AI with Google, Inflection AI with Microsoft, Adept with Amazon, and Covariant as well. The thing I want to emphasize here is how this deal went. Alex was pulled in to lead the Meta Superintelligence Lab. Scale remains independent, valued at around $30 billion. Because again, Meta was down to put, 14.3 bill? They put in 14.3 bill for 49%. That means the company is worth 14.3 times roughly 2, so 28.6 to $30 billion. That's a really high valuation. But that valuation doesn't necessarily mean anything because people on the other side of the 49%, the ones who own the other 51%, might not be able to sell that or do anything with it. At least usually, but this is not the case with what happened here. This was a partial acquisition. Meta wasn't investing into Scale AI, they were purchasing a chunk of Scale AI. And through this purchase, they allowed anybody at the company, including a bunch of investors, the opportunity to sell their ownership in shares so that they could finally cash out. So if you were an early employee in Scale and you had 0.5 to 1% equity, that might have been worth a few $1,000s when you joined. That's now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You have the opportunity to sell a little bit of it to Meta during this transition. So that was once these early employees, founders, and whatnot that worked at Scale that had the opportunity and probably took it to turn that investment into cash or trade it for Meta stock because they can hold that and sell it whenever. Something you should understand about these early stage companies is that you can't cash out until they have an event that allows you to cash out. Usually that is an acquisition or an IPO. So if you invest, $100,000 into a company that's worth $1 million as an early stage company, you own 10%. But you don't actually own anything if you're investing in most of the traditional early stage investing methodologies. This is an IOU. If the company ends up actually only being worth $500,000, depending on the way that you did that investment, there's a good chance you did it through a future equity vehicle like a SAFE. Instead of this converting as 10% of the company, this money that you invested will convert as 20% because this hasn't cashed out yet. But if the company ends up selling for $10 million, you bought at the $1 million valuation, so this will convert to be a much higher value, in this case, $1 million. You aren't buying actual equity in the company for a lot of this early stage investment. You're giving the money as an IOU in hopes that you can cash it out later. That said, we're just talking like early stage seed and pre-seed there. After that, you end up in the series A, B, and C, which tend to be more traditional stock purchases. So if you invest when they're worth $1 million and then they want to go raise some more money, that might be a series A, and that might be at a real high valuation, like 80 mil or 200 mil. At that point, stock will be issued. You would get stock based on this ratio, so you have the equity, but it's privately held equity, and chances are the company is not allowing you to sell that yet. There are markets that allow you to do secondary sales of these things, but those are sketchy and sometimes even have legal problems, so they generally are avoided. Investors don't get the opportunity to cash out their shares effectively until the founder chooses that it's time. So they might raise at another valuation, then a Series B, C, D, etc., and eventually something has to happen. There's a lot of different paths that can go. The company can fail and nobody gets anything, or they bankrupt and assets are shoveled away at a loss in hopes some investors can get something. And usually through those acquisitions, there's a stock trade or a cash purchase that allows this equity to become something else, or they can IPO, and now anyone can sell the shares that they have at any point they feel like, because it's in a public trading market. So when a private company buys a company like this, let's say, this company actually ends up being worth $3 billion. And this $3 billion acquisition is through a company like OpenAI. OpenAI is not publicly traded, which means that this $3 billion probably isn't going to be cash, it's probably going to be largely equity. They're effectively taking $3 billion of OpenAI stock, which isn't really, you can't trade it yet, it's a theoretical valuation for it. They're taking those $3 billion of OpenAI stock and handing that out to the shareholders across Windsurf. So if the founders have 50%, they now have 1.5 billion of OpenAI stock instead of having 1.5 billion of Windsurf stock. And honestly, I can understand why they would want to take that deal. Any other employees of the company, investors as well, would have a similar trade. So if you invested when they were worth 300 million, and then the trade is happening for 3 billion, you can times 10 whatever you invested in them, and you have that much stock in OpenAI. So again, just to do these numbers so it's easy to understand, if you invested $300,000 in them, and they were worth 300 million at the time as a theoretical valuation, you now own 0.1%. But what's more important is the multiplier here. A zero was added when OpenAI theoretically could have acquired them, which means I would have went from having $300,000 of Windsurf stock that I can't do anything with, to having $3 million of OpenAI stock that I also can't really do anything with. That said, a lot of these companies have values that are going to convert at some point, so what a lot of people will do is they'll take out loans against the equity. Since I have, in this theoretical case, $3 million of stock in OpenAI, most banks will see that and be like, okay, there's a good chance that's going to be worth something someday, so if I want to go buy a house for $1 million, I can do a loan against this investment that I have, because it will eventually be worth something. Probably. Why am I talking about all these in-the-weed details for a deal that failed? I'm trying to set the stage for how these things usually go. So if you were an early-stage employee at Windsurf, you have some amount of equity that you got as part of joining Windsurf. That isn't technically really worth anything until you have the chance to cash out. Same deal with a company like Scale AI, who we were just talking about before. There were a lot of founders and early-stage employees that had a bunch of equity that they couldn't really do anything with. A thing that's pretty common when these bigger investment deals occur is that they allow for employees to choose to sell some of their stock in that process. If a firm like, I don't know, Anderson Horowitz, A16Z, comes in to a deal with, I don't know, let's just say Cursor, because that's one that's recent and makes a lot of sense. If A16 comes in, they're like, we want to own 10% of Cursor. We're willing to spend $100 million for that. So they're going to spend $100 million to get 10% of Cursor. That would make the valuation $1 billion. There's a couple different ways they could do that, but what usually happens for these later stages is more stock is issued. So let's say that this chunk is investors on it. They own, right now we'll say that 20% is currently owned by investors. We'll say 5% is the employee pool. So for employees, new hires, etc., 5% of the equity for the company is owned by them for all of those purposes. And then the rest would be the founder's money. So whoever were the people who started, in this case Cursor, they would have the remaining 75%. So this is the current state of the company's stock. Founders own the majority. Most founders go out of their way to try and keep the majority of their company, as they should. If they don't own a huge chunk of the company, the incentive for them to keep working on it goes down. It's an important detail we talk about momentarily. A split like this is not uncommon. Sometimes investors get significantly higher percentages, sometimes they don't. Usually they'll be between 20 and 50% at any given stage for a Series A or later company. So if A16 comes in and they're like, okay, we want 10%, where do they take it from? Founders don't want to give up their stock. Other investors might, but they're not going to do that just yet. And part of the raise is that the company wants the money. So if A16 says, we're going to pour $100 million into this company, the company wants the money. But if the founders take it, it's their money. If the investors take it, the company doesn't get any money. And if the employee pool gets it, the company also doesn't get any money. So what usually ends up happening here is they dilute the table. What that means is additional stock is issued. Let's say that right here they had, I don't know, they had 100 million stock units, like they had 100 million RSUs for the company at this point in time. A16 wants 10%. I'm going to be lazy and make this a little easier for me. We'll say they have 90 million stock units, and that's split the way I show here. A16 wants 10%, so what they can do now is expand by 10%. They'll issue another 10 million shares, and now there's 100 million shares. This new 10% that we just carved out at the end here, this is what will be going to A16. But now this no longer adds up to 100%. This is now 110%. That's because everything else gets diluted as the result. That's how dilution works. When more money is raised, more stock is created. Because at any point in time, the board can decide they want to create and just invent more equity in the company. You have to be cautious of this, because when you do that, you are lowering the value of other equity. So ideally you do an event like this where the company's value is now higher. So if A16 is putting 100 mil in to get 10%, yes, these other people now are 10% less. So you go from 20 to 18% here, you go from 5 to 4.5% here, and you go from 75 to 68.5, I think. Math is hard, okay, you get the idea. This 10% means 10% of these percentages goes down. But if the company was only worth 500 million, I would rather have 68% of $1 billion then have 75% of $500 million. That's how all of this works. The reason I brought all of this up is they don't necessarily have to get their 10% purely through expanding the number of shares. If they want their 10%, it's not uncommon to do something like this, where they get 9% of that 10% through this creation of additional stock. So instead of doing 10 million new shares, they'll do 9 million new shares, and then they will buy the remaining shares that they need through these other groups. Founders might sell a bit, the employees might sell a bit, and the investors might sell a bit. Generally speaking, employees take the top precedent because they're not being paid hundreds of billions of dollars. So if you have stock that when you joined was worth 20K and now it's worth 2 million, you might be down to sell half of that for $1 million and suddenly have way more money in the bank. And if that's 1 million of the 100 million 16 puts in, nobody sweats, everyone's happy, and it shows to the employees that you do want them to succeed. That's why it's common for in these later stage big number investments that some percentage of this goes to these what are called secondary sales, where instead of the company creating stock to sell it to the investor to raise this money, they're allowing some amount of it to go to other parties. And the goal again is so that the company investing can get the percentage that they're looking for, the company raising can get the money they need to keep going, and so the individuals who own shares can get some amount of cash during this. As you can imagine, the OpenAI acquisition of Windsurf would have been a pretty solid opportunity for people who had invested or worked there, or especially for the founders, to get a nice payday. Even if they couldn't do it through a cash out like this, they could have, again, as I mentioned before, take out loans and do all those other things. They were probably starting to look forward to getting that opportunity. That opportunity didn't happen. One last time, let's talk about Scale AI a little more. The interesting thing that happened with Scale AI is that they didn't raise money, at least in the traditional sense. They were already profitable, they're doing very well, they're growing fast, but they were worth a lot of money. And if Zuckerberg wanted the founder of Scale AI to help him out, he had to find a way to bring him over that allowed him to justify it financially. If you run a company that's worth upwards of $30 billion, you're not going to just quit and go somewhere else, especially if you know how much that's going to hurt the investors, your reputation, the team, and everyone else involved. And that's why I actually quite like the way that they did this deal. Since Meta invested $14.3 billion for a 49% stake, they were able to let whoever wants sell some of that stock. So if Alex owned half of the company and he chose, I don't know, sell 10%, 50%, whatever of his shares, he can then sell that to Meta as part of this acquisition. Not acquisition, stake purchase. You get the idea. And any other employees, ex-founders, and even investors have the same opportunity where they can choose to effectively trade their stock for Meta stock or cash as part of this transaction. This is a big win because it means employees that are unsure about the company without Alex, like if you're an employee that's there because you really like Alex and you trust him, and he's not going to be there anymore, you can choose to trade out your stock and go somewhere else now. Or if you're an investor that is concerned the company has no direction after this change, you can cash out and move on. Chances are the investors own way less than 50%, which means if the investors own, I don't know, like 30%, and half of them decide to stay, half decide to go, you still have a bunch of money left over to give the founders, early employees, and whoever else. This is a really good deal because people who want to exit can exit, people who want to stay can stay. Meta gets who they want, which is Alex, as well as having a stake in a company that could potentially benefit them significantly. This is kind of an everyone wins deal. I know there are obviously losers when billionaires are trading back and forth like it's a fucking baseball card system, but you get the idea. There's no clear, obvious loser in a deal like this, and I honestly think that this was handled well, considering the chaotic nature of a trade like this. So why am I talking about all of this? I'm talking about all of this because I want to make sure you guys have context on what has shifted here. If the original deal was $3 billion for OpenAI, everyone was probably getting pretty excited about that. But the deal failed. It's worth going into why the deal failed because this part is confusing. I've talked about this a little bit in the past. There was a very strange deal between OpenAI and Microsoft. The deal that OpenAI and Microsoft have is Microsoft invests X billion. I don't remember how much, doesn't necessarily matter for the points I'm about to make here. They invest billions of dollars. MS gives OAI access to way more infra because they need as many GPUs and as many servers as possible to both train and serve their users, their models. And another important part of this deal, because again, remember OpenAI, you can't just own stock and expect it to convert traditionally, they have their caps and whatnot. The other part of this deal was that Microsoft gets rights to all IP developed at OpenAI until AGI is achieved. So until OpenAI hits this definition of AGI that OpenAI and Microsoft agreed to, any new IP developed at OpenAI is also something Microsoft has access to. This has caused a ton of drama back and forth between Microsoft and OpenAI, and it's a big part of why the relationship is starting to fracture. This got really bad during the OpenAI O model reveal, specifically O1, into this concept of reasoning that they pushed really hard. They didn't give any of the information to Microsoft, and that caused some real bad blood between these guys. So what's going on here? Windsurf, as you guys know, is a VS Code fork. They're a VS Code fork that has their own IP and things they've done and invented in order to make editing with agents and AI a better experience. If Windsurf was to be acquired by OpenAI, it's now part of this deal. Hypothetically, because again, I haven't gotten this as a formal detail from anyone directly involved, this is secondary and tertiary information from people I do trust, but I don't have a good source I can link you to because this isn't information that is public. This is my understanding of things based on the reporting that I've been able to get from people independently. Microsoft would get Windsurf's IP as part of this trade. So if you believe that Windsurf has some novel technology that is worth the $3 billion that this acquisition would be for, that all, by default, gets sent to Microsoft as part of the agreement that they already have with OpenAI. Microsoft are the owners and creators of VS Code. This would effectively mean that Microsoft could fold all of Windsurf's work into VS Code for free. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer. These details aren't public. This is the key detail that almost certainly prevented this deal from happening. I wish we had more info. I wish you guys would be more transparent. I get why they can't be, though. There's a very, very good chance that Microsoft would have default gotten all of the IP from the acquisition, kind of making it valueless to OpenAI to do it, because they're buying Windsurf in order to keep up with developers, and now Microsoft gets all of the same benefits that OpenAI gets. That's just not a good transaction. That doesn't make sense for OpenAI. So this is almost certainly the detail that caused the deal to fail. My guess is they spent the last few months trying to fight it and failed, but an expectation was already set. Employees, investors, and founders all expected to be able to cash out some amount as part of this. They would either get this OpenAI stock at this absurd valuation, they can take loans out against it, they can sell it to OpenAI or to other people in a secondary market potentially. This would be a transaction where a lot of the people that are involved in Windsurf would theoretically get a lot of money and be in a really good position. They all probably started planning around this. I would be very surprised if there weren't a bunch of employees that were expecting this to happen and started looking for a new house to purchase, or planning their own startups, or getting excited to start investing, or do the other things with this crazy amount of cash. Other things with this crazy amount of cash that they were expecting to get as part of this. And suddenly none of that happens. So imagine you're the founder of Windsurf. You were expecting to make some number of billions of dollars, or at the very least, to get some number of billions of dollars of OpenAI stock. You would no longer have to be on the startup grind of fighting to survive every day. Your team would be well taken care of, your investors would be happy with everything that happened, and now you get to lead a team at a big, well-funded company and just focus on delivering solutions. You no longer have to worry about all these fundraising things, all of the chaos of the paperwork and all the other stuff that I have to deal with every day. Being a founder is not a glamorous life. It's mostly email and paperwork. As such, the founder, Varun, was probably getting pretty excited to have this exit. He probably mentally resigned some amount his role at Windsurf, which is why things have been so quiet from them for a while now. I can understand that he was probably very excited to just not worry about any of these things anymore and just grind on Windsurf, help OpenAI make better dev tools, and move on with his life. And now, for reasons that have almost nothing to do with him or his company, that can't happen. Understandably, that's a painful spot to be in. To expect literal billions of dollars and then get nothing. Ugh, that's not a fun spot to be in. As such, he was probably starting to talk to other places and consider other deals, because he is mentally moved to this expected plan And now the unexpected happened. So who could possibly acquire our friends over at Windsurf? OpenAI can't because of the Microsoft thing. Microsoft has no reason to because they already have VS Code and Copilot, and they're going to keep grinding there. Anthropic's certainly not going to do this after, especially when you saw how bad Anthropic treated Windsurf during the potential acquisition with OpenAI. They have no interest. I'm pretty sure Claude Code already has more users than Windsurf does anyways. So who has the most to stand benefit-wise from this acquisition? Google. And this is where things get very interesting. Google wants to win developers in the AI world. And to be frank, so does OpenAI. That's why they were considering this acquisition in the first place. That's why Codex, the CLI by OpenAI, is this big open source project that supports every model. That's why they're about to release their open model and why they're being transparent about the delays that just happened there. All of these companies are fighting to win developers. There's a reason. Anthropic's only edge is that developers like them. When you benchmark Anthropic models like Claude 4, Sonnet, and Opus on any traditional knowledge tasks, be it math, science, ArcAGI, Humanities Last Benchmark, all of these things you can test models against, Anthropic models tend to not do well. But they do have some important strengths. They're good at writing code, and more importantly, they're really good at tool calls, which means if you tell an AI to do something like send an email in these conditions, here's the format that you should send me text, it will then trigger an email send. Anthropic models have been the best at tool calling for a long time now. Claude 3.5 Sonnet was a revolution in this space specifically, because 3.5 Sonnet was so much more reliable at doing these things that we could start building applications around this idea of tool calling and function calling. There's also stuff like MCP, the standard that Anthropic made to standardize tool calls across network boundaries and all sorts of other use cases too. Since the Anthropic models are best at tool calls, they're also the best for us as developers to integrate into our things. You want to make an AI agent that can query against your database to find information and then filter that into something that a user can see. Anthropic models are probably your best bet. If you're building an AI coding tool that can grep your code base, find something, and then apply it diff via yet another tool, Anthropic models are your best bet. If you're doing anything that requires code to be run by the model, Anthropic models tend to be your best bet. Even if they're not the smartest, even if they're not the cheapest, even if they're not the nicest to use, even if they're one of the slowest options, their reliability with tool calls has made them the choice for developers. And the fact that they're also good at code means that they're the models we're using to write code. You'll see whenever I hop into my editor, which is admittedly still Cursor, I'm an investor, so I'm biased. Doesn't really matter here though. I'm using Claude 4 Sonnet. I love talking crap on Anthropic, but there's no crap to talk here. They are really good at this in particular. They're good at using the tools in your editor and writing code in general, and the result is that developers default to Anthropic models. Both OpenAI and Google have recognized they are behind in this space. OpenAI in particular fell real far behind because they didn't know any of this was going to be so important. They were too focused on making the models as smart as possible. So starting earlier this year with the drops of models like O3 Mini, O4 Mini, GPT 4.1, as well as Codex, a lot more focus was put in from OpenAI in winning developer sentiment. That's also why they were trying to acquire Windsurf, because they wanted to have a stronger foothold in what developers needed, as well as a place to test all these complex tool call things so they could make OpenAI models as good as the Claude models at doing this type of work. Google's also trying to do this. Gemini 2.5 Pro is a very clear attempt at trying to win developers over, and they've done multiple re-releases of the model with slight changes and shifting around of the weights in order to try and make it even better at code. That all said, they're still mediocre at tool calls. The Gemini models have a fun trait, especially 2.5 Pro, where they will clearly describe all the things they intend to do in your code base using the tools that they have access to, and then just not do it. This has been a very common problem with Gemini models, and as a result, they tend to not be the defaults that we reach to for integrating into our services, for using in our code editors, and all these other things. There was a brief moment where 2.5 Pro is what we used in our editors, but I had enough frustration that I stopped using it relatively fast. And when Claude 4 Sonnet dropped, I kind of just stopped thinking about Gemini 2.5 Pro. It stopped being interesting to me the moment that happened. So Google doing this makes a ton of sense. Cursor, it will be sticking with Claude models until there's a good reason for them to stop. Neither Google nor OpenAI can catch up without the right tools and incentives and developer sentiment to justify it. And if both Google and OpenAI want to win developers over, they need a better starting point for that, both to improve their models in these cases and to give developers a reason to interface with them in the first place. So why do they care about devs so much? Devs choose which models win. I would guess that the majority of the inference happening for OpenAI is happening in ChatGPT and other things that OpenAI owns. I would guess less than 5%, probably less than 1% of Anthropic's inference is even happening in the Anthropic, stuff. I would be incredibly surprised if Claude.ai, their crappy chat app, was more than 1% of the usage of Anthropic in the world. I'd be surprised if Anthropic's own servers were even more than 30% of all Anthropic model usage, since both Google and AWS pay a license fee in order to run Claude models on